Great. All right. Well, we're live now. We're live a little bit early, about a minute or so early, and we want everybody to have a chance to get logged in and make sure they're in the right place. So we'll wait another minute before we get started. Welcome, everyone. If you're here already, happy Thursday. How's your Thursday going, SJ? So far.
So far, it began with a very inspiring Zoom,
Yeah.
and my choice of coffee so far good. I'm not like the connoisseur Libby, but I have hazelnut today, and it's actually tasting pretty good.
Oh, that's good. You're so funny. I know I sometimes can be a little serious about my coffee.
And for those of us out there who are
Okay.
serious about their coffee, I am sorry to disappoint you, but believe it or not, and this might be make me a heretic, but literally my favorite type of coffee, since I don't have a Keurig, is, believe
Uh-huh.
it or not, one of these little sticks.
Is it?
And
Okay.
and you know what? It actually works. You're
With the
thinking to
powder
yourself,
in it?
yeah. And you're
Yeah.
thinking, man, this is cheap or this is whatever. And it's like if you're a coffee snob or whatever, forgive me for the bluntness here, but it's like, hey, it works for me. So please bear with me. If I'm a heretic to the coffee world, it works for me.
It's funny, since we're doing nonprofit coffee talk, we should probably start every episode talking about coffee. And I think this warrants a coffee tip too, really quickly. Sprinkle just a little salt in your coffee grounds to take the bitterness out before you brew it or pour water over it or whatever you do. I don't know where I learned that from, but it's actually spot on. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Super excited today. Welcome, everyone tuning in, and thank you for being with us today. We hope you find this session today helpful and hope you have found the past ones and the future ones helpful. If you're looking for the catalog of historic nonprofit coffee talks, meaning last week and the weeks before, you can find those on the Facebook page and on YouTube and on LinkedIn on my profile. So hopefully you get a chance to watch the ones that interest you. So excited today to have SJ Barakony here to talk about mutual aid societies. And we're going to talk about what is a mutual aid society and how does it fit in today? Because if it sounds like an old term, it is an old term, but it's relevant today. And so we're going to talk about that with SJ. So just to introduce SJ really quickly. So SJ, you were probably one of the first people I met when I went out on my own on this entrepreneurial journey and started networking. I think you were one of the early folks that I met in my early networking time. So here we go for full circle, right? So
Absolutely.
SJ is an American small business founder with a boundless appreciation for people, entrepreneurship, liberty, and lifelong learning. He has ties to multiple business ventures and started one of his business ventures, the Education Sherpa, in late 2011. Over the next 11 years, he's been offered a number of opportunities to partner with others like the H7 Network, which is where I met him, Econ Impact Catalyst, the Entrepreneurial Leap, Be Konnected, and Web Strategy Plus, which and social media enthusiasts. Now, did I get that right? Because I was looking at the Web Strategy Plus and then social media enthusiasts, right?
You did. The social media enthusiast is a sub brand of Web
Oh,
Strategy Plus.
great, thank you. So SJ is a thought leader, a futurist, a guest blogger, a super connector, and he does take that connecting very seriously and has a lot of fun with it too. He's a speaker, a historian, and a soft skills specialist. So welcome, SJ. We're thrilled to have you today. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
well, thank you so much for the kind
Yeah,
invite, Libby. I really appreciate it. And my
absolutely.
mantra is very simple. I'm going to do my very best, whether it's a podcast, a live stream, an audio, a panel, whatever,
Mhm.
to serve, to solve, and to share.
Love it. That's easy. Three S's. That's beautiful. And I'm Libby V, nonprofit champion and founder of Libby V and Associates. And through visioning theory of change work, leadership coaching, fundraising support, and organizational and board development, our nonprofit leader clients successfully raise more money and have more impact. But not all nonprofits can afford to hire a consultant. So I created the nonprofit coffee talk as a way to provide great content, helpful information, and get it out to as many nonprofit people as I can, or social good people. I hope you find this useful, the coffee talk in general, and especially today, since we're here today on a great topic. Um, always welcome your suggestions for people or topics to have on the nonprofit coffee talk. And I even more so appreciate you volunteering to be a guest if you have something that you would like to bring to the coffee talk. So reach out to me, please. All right. So, SJ, what is a mutual aid society and how is it relevant to today?
Excellent question. It's sort of like setting the table for a nice dinner. Okay. Folks, when you heard my bio, my introduction, I specifically include the historian and the futurist in there. And you might think, is that canceling one another out? The answer is absolutely positively not, because history informs not only the present, but also leaves us a lot of breadcrumb trail for the future. And this topic is a perfect exemplar of that. So what is a mutual aid society? A little later, I'll do my best to share a couple resources here live, and then I'll also share those with Libby to provide also in another way. But my way of describing it, marrying the historian in me, the amateur historian, to the future work, future of education advocate that I am, is to say this. You're taking a concept of grassroots, bottom up community involvement to deal with a societal issue involving aid, to provide aid and comfort for someone in your community. So let's think of some examples here. Whether it is a global pandemic, and some of these mutual aid societies thrived during the last global one, which was the Spanish flu, or whether it was more recently during the darkest days of the COVID-19 era, or whether it is during a hurricane, or whether it is dealing with a certain segment of society that might feel marginalized or underserved by existing enterprises. It's taking the spirit and the heart of most Americans to be generous, to be willing to serve, to be willing to help their fellow citizen, but doing it grassroots, doing it decentralized, and providing aid and comfort to their neighbor, to someone in their cul-de-sac, someone on the other side of town, without expecting some third party to do it. So that would be my way of defining it.
That's great. And there are lots of examples of organizations that started out in a more grassroots way like that, right? Like the American Red Cross and all those organizations that you see sort of mobilizing in crises. I imagine could have had started with just some people like, let's do something.
Exactly. And there's that key term too, mutual. It's a mutual exchange. It's an exchange, in this case, more on a barter basis of I have time and a desire to deal with the societal issue in my community. Someone else needs this. So it is free enterprise in its purest form.
Yeah.
There's no friction from an organization structure that might be slow to pivot, slow to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
There's no friction. There's no friction because you're expecting, per se, immediate payment or something. There's no friction from waiting for someone to give permission, because these are defined, mutual aid societies tend to be permissionless organizations. In other words, I would rather seek forgiveness than wait for permission because a hurricane just came through.
Yeah.
So they absolutely are very, very relevant to 2022 and beyond America and other nations.
Mm-hmm.
It just, we have to draw from the past to inform the future. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not deeply and richly educated in history.
Mm-hmm.
They're given names and dates, and they're not given deeper concepts like this, because if they understood what these were, there would be even more of them. But believe it or not, even with that lack, Libby, there are still some examples. And that's why I gave the COVID example earlier. There were several mutual aid society type efforts that arose because of the massive impact of that disruption and the lockdown and everything else we dealt with.
Yeah, and I see a lot of nonprofits starting from a mutual aid society approach, right? I think. So, you know, a group of people get together and maybe they have a common experience or a common desire to help in their community. And they just kind of jump in and start doing something to help others in the community, right? And sometimes that ends up being a 501c3 application and getting that. And sometimes it could end up being a B Corp or social enterprise. But that's the way I see a lot of them coming together. Is that sort of, does that fall under the category of mutual aid society?
I think it absolutely can. There is an element here of voluntarism, if I'm using the right accent. So if you're out in the audience and you've heard of this concept, bear with me, I may have put the accent wrong, but it's basically putting the word voluntary and adding ism to it. A lot of people are very familiar with other isms, and whatever your perspective on these other isms, we're not here to discuss that today, but let's just pick one. And I know this could generate some possible conversation, again, another podcast, but capitalism, okay? So let's take, or conscious capitalism, even better. A conscious capitalist centric type of philosophy, Libby, works very, very well in the constraints of the historical mutual aid society. Okay. Or for any of you all who might be listening either live or to this later, watching this later, in central Ohio, there was an organization that arose called Can't Stop Columbus. I would make you a good case that there's a lot of elements of a mutual aid society in what they did, even though they may not have even thought of the word bingo.
Yes, that's right. So what's a really good sort of example of conscious capitalism that we see a lot or that we know that most people know? What's a good example? Is Tom's Shoes a good example of? Is that an example of conscious capitalism? Like buy a pair of shoes, and we'll donate a pair.
Excellent example. Yes, the buy one and donate is a good example. Last I knew, and I think you know this same person, if not, audience, bear with me. I think Libby knows the same person as I do. Her name is Claire with Aunt Flo.
Yep.
Flo has that model.
Yes.
So whether, and I've known Claire for many years, so if she ever
Yes.
watches this, hi Claire. But
She's phenomenal.
but I don't know if she even realizes that in many respects, she's not only conscious capitalist, but she has elements, loose as they might be, but the spirit, the heart of a mutual aid society, even though she is a
Yeah.
for-profit.
Yes, exactly.
So those are great examples right there. And
Mhm.
if you are someone out there in the social enterprise space, you've been through a Sea Change program, a Give Back Hack, a social ventures, or whatever other programs exist in your area, feel free to bring this concept back to the forefront, because history, once again, informs the present and does a tremendous value to people who are future minded, because we can
Mhm.
take lessons learned from a century ago, 75 years ago, etc., and we can take the best of those and apply it to a world now which is way different, obviously, than it was in 1922.
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, it's when you get to a certain point in your life, history you see history repeating itself, sort of. And this has come around again for sure. And I love your example of COVID, because we did see a lot of that. We did see a lot of people coalescing around different topics, right? I saw all kinds of stuff going on. To help each other out. Servers in restaurants were being helped out, by neighbors, right? People were organizing things like that, and so it was exciting to see people just getting into action to help each other. And that's a fancy term, right? Kind of mutual aid society, but it's very simple in concept. It's a
It is.
beautiful thing.
It
Hmm.
is, because society and the culture around it are a mirror of who we are, is it not?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and a lot of people in America, and again, if there's people in other nations, bear with me, but I'm sure you can give me plenty of examples from your own culture.
Hmm.
But there's a tremendous amount of people that are willing to step up from the bottom up and offer that mutual, again, pure free enterprise here, lacking friction, if not 100%, they're close to it, and saying, I am going to help someone in my community that needs
Hmm.
fill in the blank.
Yeah, and I think the more recent examples you also mentioned of like the hurricane and things like that are always where I see people get into action, right? Like I want to help, whether that means rescuing animals or rescuing people or sheltering people afterwards. There's just a lot of that going on. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because I know that one of your strong lanes and a lot of your work is based in education. And so I want to talk a little bit about that eventually, but first I want to talk a little bit about the future of work and
Yeah.
what you see happening out there with the future of work. And then we're going to talk about learning culture and education and entrepreneurship, but like what are you seeing for the future of work? Because
This
COVID, this is a good follow on, right? COVID changed the way that we work.
It did. Now, any massive disruptive change like that, there's going to be some natural tendency for the rubber band, if you will, to want to, you know, you stretched it and it's like, well, eventually it'll come back. But again, is the rubber band ever exactly the same as it was after you stretched it?
No.
Bingo, future work. So if you are out there and you are dealing with an organization, either for profit, nonprofit, governmental, non governmental, academic, non academic, all these various distinctions, and you are being pressed to go back to the way it was, my most humble advice for you as a committed futurist who, again, understands history at a deep level, history was always my strongest subject, is in the nicest way you can, push back. Because a society cannot continue to advance and evolve and become a better version of itself, examining it from time to time. And that's what the COVID era did. It put a big mirror up to the professional world. And some people, organizations, because organizations are made up of people, right? Even though we inaccurately still call them resources, and that just gnaws at me. Any organization should eliminate the term human resources immediately. But bottom line is, this mirror was held up. And we need to look at and say, okay, what did we learn from this, and what was reflected back initially as well? So what I'm seeing is, number one, the migration patterns, and it'll take several years for all that data to churn through the demographics and everything, but some of the early numbers are very clear. And obviously even the 2020 census which was conducted in a crazy time, obviously. Even the earliest measures of that are showing this as well, let alone if you use moving van records and other such things. Migration is moving back out into more small town rural environments, because no longer do you have to have a geographical attachment to where you choose to work. So that's the first thing. Migration trends and the physical attachment to a workplace. Now, obviously, if you're one of those people saying, well, wait a minute, I'm serving food, or I'm cutting someone's hair, or I'm working on a car or something, some of those do have some physical ties, but there are enterprising people that are creating mobile hair cutting places, mobile oil changes. So even some of those things that you might think, oh, it's got to happen at a physical place. Don't rule out the entrepreneurial spirit, folks.
Right.
Second thing real quick is more entrepreneurship. There were some doom and gloomers, some call them black pillars, who were saying that entrepreneurship is going to die because of COVID. They didn't understand the entrepreneurial spirit. There were more startups during the COVID era than have been seen in forever, if not ever, right? Now, does that mean every single one of those ventures is going to be successful? Of course not. Even in the most strongest economic times, there's always business failure or success. So that's the second thing. And then third thing is, we're starting to see organizations become more nimble, more agile, and more flexible, decentralized autonomous organizations, flatten hierarchies, fully remote teams, fully remote schedules. That's the third and last thing I'll share.
Yeah, that's good. And do you how do you how do you relate this to nonprofits? So how, nonprofits are a little different, right? And I'm gonna put all social good organizations into one bucket, right? So let's talk about social good organizations in whatever form they're in. How do you think that this is affecting them? You know, I say it's probably affecting them even more than other organizations. And how are they adjusting to this change in work? Do you see anything in there?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when I do a mash of this together, or a Venn diagram,
Yeah.
the first thing I see is, I think there's going to be a long tail, or what Edward Banfield called long time perspective. I think it's going to be a strong net positive. Now, here's why. And then I'll back up to the present in a moment. But remember, I'm a futurist, right? But the long tail, or the long time perspective, is if people do not have to waste needless time commuting, and they have their time to themselves, because it's not about measuring time, it's about measuring results and outcomes. So if I am working the so-called conventional 1908 era 40-hour, 5-day work week, which, by the way, is from about 1908, historian. Bottom line is, if I can get that same work done in 28 hours, you shouldn't penalize me for it. You either give me something that's more challenging, or I'm done. I've earned my salary, I've earned my wage, I've earned my bonus or commission, right? So
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
extra time can be redeployed from the commute or from working not on a factory, unit of time for unit of dollar exchange. You can now redeploy that into voluntarism and being more involved in your community rather than home to work, rinse, repeat. I have to go to work. I'm tired. I got on vacation. I need a second vacation. These are all signs of the industrial age run amok, and we got to put an end to the industrial age, and we got to move into this era of mutual exchange, mutual aid, and helping our fellow citizen without claiming that we have to work. Because yes,
Yeah.
we do have to make a choice to work in order to earn, in order for that that commerce and that free enterprise to work, right? But we don't have to do it at a physical place. And if I'm a
Mhm.
nonprofit, I'm looking at this long tail, at this long time perspective, and saying this is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the short term, I think there's going to be some benefit too, because some of these more outlying areas that may not have been getting as much attention, because people are able now with remote work and such to be closer to their community.
Yeah.
I think some of these smaller nonprofits and such that don't have the headquarters in downtown Cleveland or whatever, with all respect to those that do, I think they're going to get a little bit more attention. And I don't know, that's just an educated guess
Yeah.
at it for short term. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Um, we mentioned education too, and there's just a lot going on in education. I imagine everybody who's tuning in and not tuning in has been hearing about the Great Resignation, and there's a lot of that happening in traditional education. But I know you have a futuristic and different take on education versus school. So talk a little bit about how this is affecting education and the educational system.
Well, the first thing is if I have a nonprofit, mutual aid, social consciousness, heart, spirit, and soul, if I'm you in the audience, I'm cheering this on, because the old model of coercive push delivery of education is slow but surely coming to an end now, because we don't need an authority figure standing in front of a class in a physical building anymore. Okay. We need someone who has a social understanding of their local community, who can take these students, help facilitate, help draw out of them educar, which is to draw out within from. That's true education. School, look up the root definition. School and education, please, are not the same thing. Please don't confuse them anymore. So this gives someone who wants to educate the next generation. They went into teaching with a noble goal, and I am fully behind them. But what they found was an industrial age, rusting away edifice, a system that was from a different economic time. And it lacked the heart, spirit, and soul of a mutual aid society, of a social enterprise in the more modern parlance. It lacked the ability to pivot and have agility and flexibility to take these young people and perhaps have them help in the community, right? And it made that very difficult. But now, as we are unraveling that and decentralizing the delivery methods, I fully expect that we should have, if not the late Zoomers, we now have Libby Gen Alpha. We're starting over at the beginning of the alphabet again. So Gen Alpha right now, depending on how you count, are roughly between the ages of 6 and 8 or younger. So if you have kids or grandkids in the audience and they are no older than roughly 8, they are Gen Alpha. And I think those people, those very, very young folks, are going to have an opportunity to make more of a difference in their community, because the future of education is bringing it back to the community, to the public commons, rather than having this bigger is better physical edifice where you have to spend tens of millions of dollars to maintain all these buildings. I don't think that's a good use of community resources. So that's where we're heading. And there's still much more to happen, but I think those who went into the teaching profession, please hang on. Some of the stuff you're hearing is a little bit more of scarcity and fear talking rather than abundance and faith. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah. And you know, my concern, you know, is just making sure that we're thinking of the people who have barriers to non-traditional educational means, right? So
That's right.
that we saw a lot of that during COVID with, you know, kids that didn't have technology at home or the internet, and we're struggling to keep up, and it'll be interesting to see where all that lands. But man, you gave us a lot to think about.
I appreciate that. And that I had someone in my network, Libby, once, and he said this about me, and I'm just a messenger delivering something that, again, I'm hoping is serving the audience, helping them to solve and sharing. But the one thing is that last comment you made, and I'll briefly comment on that, or briefly remark on it, is to say this. Folks like that who struggled with the definition of remote learning or hybrid learning that rolled out, we definitely have to embrace, and how can we do delivery to serve all disadvantaged populations? Because when you go back to the mutual aid societies of 75, 100, 125 years ago, you understand that there were similar issues back then, maybe with different types of groups, right? Whether it was ethnic barriers, language barriers, disabilities in that era. And bottom line is they made it work. And by decentralizing it and empowering the entrepreneurial energy, empowering energy, edification, encouragement, we will have real, true education once again in every corner of this society.
Well, on that note, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Everybody, if you want to touch base with SJ, connect with SJ. That's what I wanted to say. In our post on this is his contact information, but we'll share that out again with the recording. And I just want to invite you to tune in next week, when our guest will be Cindy Meyer, and I'm going to share this up so people can see it. And she's going to talk about common elements of grant proposals and how you can pull that information together and be ready to write grants. So that should be a good session. And then Courtney Hawkins with EDCI is going to be on the 27th. So we have lots of great stuff coming up, and we're scheduled into November, and much more to come. So super excited about upcoming guests. Thank you, SJ. Appreciate you being here today. I hope you have a good day. And of course, go out and make it a great one. And we'll see each other soon. I'll invite you back at some point to circle back around and dig in a little deeper. How about that?
Absolutely. And because of the flow of the conversation, I chose not to share what I mentioned earlier. So I will provide that, and you can share it in a different way, because again, folks, there's a lot of information out there about mutual aid societies. It's just, you've got to be willing to be inquisitive and curious and creative. So I will share a couple of those resources with Libby. So on that note, it was an honor to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, thanks, SJ. Take care. Everybody have a good day. Thank you for tuning in.